They asked me to choose the form of the destructor, and all I could think of was fragments of silicon.
Somebody clearly watched Ghostbusters during the break.
I don't. The chain of thought that brought that up was very strange.
No doubt.
So, like
Like,
most trains of thought.
uh, anyway, welcome one and all to the 11th season of Fragments of Silicon. Um, our first interview of the season. Mind you, it's not the official start of the season. That happened on Sunday where we did our first batch of reviews. If you haven't watched them, be sure to do so. Um, Either on YouTube or Twitch. It really doesn't matter. Like, anyway,
Or
joining
go
us.
back and live if you go back and watch them live if you have access to a time travel machine.
If they have access to a time travel machine, they might want to do other things than watching. It's like
Watching us is
anyway,
good. Watching us is
yeah,
good. Do that.
yeah. Anyway, joining us this week is Nick Clarkson of Merge Games.
Hi there, guys. How are you all?
We're doing fine. At least I think we are. Like, hopefully properly caffeinated for the new season. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, given that this is the European interviews, we get right into things, and we like to start by getting to know the person behind the games, behind the company, what have you. And we like to ask this pertinent question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Oh man, I was trying to work out how long I've been in video games, and I did a quick calculation. Um, I've been doing this 35 years. I'm my 35th year. I started when I was 17, so you do the math.
Jeez.
Um, I guess my love of video games started maybe in the arcades with all the old classics, Space Invaders, Asteroids, so on and so forth. But I do remember vividly being at high school and my father coming to collect me from school, which was uncommon because normally I caught the bus home. And he marched me into our nearest town. It was 1981, and he purchased for me a small computer called a Sinclair ZX81. And if you can think about it, this had a touch type keyboard and had 1K of onboard memory. Anyway, I took that sucker home, plugged it into our CRT TV, typed in a basic code that gave me a one character Space Invader that went across the screen and that you shot at. I had maybe half an hour's worth of fun on that before it was time to head upstairs for sleep for that night. I got up super early in the morning thinking, wow, I'm going to play Space Invaders again. And of course, I didn't realize that you had to save all your data before you turn the machine off, and I'd lost it all. But it didn't dissuade me. That was my sort of introduction to home sort of video games, and it just went on from there. I was lucky enough to work in retail for a couple of years, where I got to know a guy called Hugh Gollner, who decided that when the Atari ST hit, that we would do a magazine. And I guess the rest is history. I started off in journalism with him. Our first magazine, between just two of us creating it, was full color, 64 pages, and went on sale in stores across the UK. And we never looked back. We then took it on and did gaming sort of versions for ST and through all the iterations of consoles that were coming out. I think the SNES and the Mega Drive were our first sort of foray into console. And it was all good fun. I worked on a weekly magazine called Games X. I think it only published in the UK. We did that for a while, and that's one hell of a treadmill. You try finding enough content on a weekly basis. There was no internet; you couldn't search for this stuff. It was all done sort of through visits and phone calls and postal service. Anyway, we did that for a while. I got bored, and eventually I thought, you know what? All this writing about games is great, but let's go and actually work for a software house. So I interviewed for a few jobs. I ended up at a software publisher in Sheffield, here in the UK, called Gremlin Graphics, where I stayed for a little while before making what was probably my major move to Ocean Software of Manchester in the UK, and they were the company that were doing all sort of the arcade conversions. So we had a lot of that sort of thing going on. We had film licenses, so they were actually tying in the likes of Jurassic Park back in the day, in the first Mission Impossible movie. And I worked there. I worked there for a while, and then a slew of other software publishers. And now, up to date, I find myself here at Merge Games in the northwest of England, which is we're a small indie outfit. I was trying to count up how many staff we have full time, and I got to 12, and that's it. And for a team of 12, I think we punch above our weight sometime.
Like, team of 12, that's more than other entities you've had on the program, less than others. So.
Yeah, but don't forget, we're putting out both digital content and we're doing retail as well. So it's
right.
not bad.
Right. You are part of this, I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but boutique publishers, this, for people who say that physical is going away, I mean, there's more physical now than there was like during the Xbox 360 era, especially of games of this size.
Yeah. I like the phrase boutique, and there are subsections of that as well. We always, originally when Merge Games was founded, the boss, Luke Kieran, he was actually doing sort of PC games, and he was putting stuff into boxes and selling it sort of in Europe and in the Middle East, into Australasia and all that kind of stuff. So he was already doing stuff in boxes, and it seemed a natural progression. We went, when I joined the company, we did our first console game, and then one day we sat back and said, well, why aren't we putting these onto disc? Because people want them and people like them. So we've got sort of two prongs to the business, both digital and retail. And I guess we've also joined that subset where we do collector's versions as well of some of the titles. So it's a challenge all the time. Being a boutique, smaller sort of size publisher, it doesn't come without its challenges, but we're learning all the time. We're improving all the time. We're getting last year, 2018, and now 2019 have been particularly good for us with the quality of titles. It's sort of just skyrocketed, and we're proud to put our name on boxes with the likes of Motion Twin and Dead Cells and Red Hook and Darkest Dungeon. It's quite something to behold.
Played both of those games, both for the show and personally, both really good products.
I think that almost becomes the acid test. Certainly, when I was a journalist, and now where I work with games, Dead Cells we saw week in, week out, and you'd think by the time I got home, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with it. But man alive, the number of hours I've sunk into that game, it just shows you sort of what a great title it is. And I think that's the acid test. You do it for work, but then you take it home and you continue sort of the affair with that particular title, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, you can certainly relate, given the amount of games we play in a given season or year. I mean, it's like we review 2, 3, sometimes 4 games a week.
Yeah,
so it's like, some games they get played, and very occasionally they'll be played beyond the week. But anyway, and you've got a myriad of games here, and let's see where to start. I suppose we should start with a game that just got released last week, however long ago, Vaporum.
Okay, yeah, that's very recent. This was a bit of a labour of love. I found this game and the developers in Croatia. There's the Reboot event over there. And I went along just to really check it out and try and find some content. And this was one game that was on PC. At the time, I don't think they were even thinking of console at the time. And I just played it, and it took me back to sort of my early Atari ST days when there was a game called Dungeon Master by a company called FTL. I think they were out of California. It was this sort of grid-based dungeon crawler where in the original Dungeon Master you had 4 people. In this, it was you in a sort of cyberpunk exoskeleton. But it really resonated with me, and I got chatting to the guys, and I said, if you ever do this on console, you must get in touch. I'd be interested in it. But I didn't push it any more than that. Ultimately, I was after a free Steam key so I could play it myself at home. Which I did, and I beat it, and I wrote back to the team and thanked them for the experience, told them what I thought of it and how I enjoyed it, and that was that. And then lo and behold, they got in touch and said, you know what, we think we will do it on console. How can you guys help? And that's where we kind of started. We looked at the different porting options. They did, in the end, they ended up appointing a porting team themselves. But we've taken it and marketed it, and I think it's an evergreen title kind of thing. It's one of those ones that will sit there. It's done okay on release, but it just continues to just be a steady seller. Fans of the genre know what to expect, and they'll like it. But you're also pulling in, thanks to the cyberpunk element of it, and people who like the likes of BioShock and that kind of thing are giving it a look. We've currently got it on I think it's still on a deal digitally, and then we'll give a few more weeks, and then we'll promote it again. We've also got a version on there's a retail version of it, and there's a signature edition, special edition version of it coming as well. So we're pretty pleased with it.
Yeah. And I suppose this is a good point to get into some of the finer details of how your business works, especially like the retail. Like, you mentioned the signature edition. Mm-hmm. What differentiates the signature edition from a regular edition at retail?
Okay. So, we'll start off with what is the vanilla retail version, and that's just the game as you would walk into the likes of GameStop or Best Buy, EB if you're in Canada. And that's the version that you pick off the shelf. It's just the game in a box, and you're done. You put it in your console and you play. The signature edition comes in. If you remember, the old PC titles used to come in a big, heavy sort of Sierra box. That's what they were called. So they come presented in this Sierra box with a slipcase over the top that's got all some different artwork about the game on there. Stuff on the back. You open it all up, and inside there, all neatly packaged within a foam inlay is the game. There'll normally be a soundtrack. There'll definitely be a couple of pin badges. There might be an art book, a poster. There'll be a signed art card, which has got the digitally printed signatures of all the team on it. And it'll also be numbered as well. So you're kind of getting the whole gamut sort of collector's edition all in one package. But those we only sell through our own signature edition website, or if you're lucky enough to catch us at PAX East or West, we normally take a selection of stock over there as well.
And are your print editions limited run, or how does that work?
No. We don't set a capped number on each particular title. What we try and do is, but if we do, then we come out, we say there are only however many, 3,000 of these units out there. For instance, with Dead Cells, we did a first run, which sold out pretty quick. That came with a numbered card, so you knew which number of the first edition you were getting. Since then, we've restocked. The numbered art card is no longer in there, so you don't get that. But everything else that you would normally get the signature edition is there. And we try and sort of gauge using our own skill and algorithms that we've got built up. We kind of guess how many units we're going to have, and generally we're not far off. If a game is particularly popular, like Dead Cells, then yes, there's always the option to reprint and do more. But it's led by demand. What we try not to do is open ourselves up for scalpers and all of that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it works.
That's good to hear, actually. I mean, look, I like limited run games as much as the next guy, but I it's like I don't like the actual limited run portion of that, because it's like if you miss it.
It's better than not having any physical thing at all, but it also is a little bit unfair to people who are slow on the uptake or whatever sometimes.
And another way that we look at it is one of our business mantras, sort of certainly internally. Merge Games and Signature Edition as a subsidiary of it exist to delight our customers, and we've actually got two lots of customers here. We've got the games buying and playing public, the guys out there that just want to play the game and it's their hobby and they enjoy it. But equally, the development studios that make these games, they're our customer. We kind of exist for them. And if we were to Dead Cells again, if we were to say to them, you know what, we're only putting out 3,000 copies of this, and when it's done, it's done. We're actually cutting off some of their revenue supply, and they need the money to be able to go and make Dead Cells 2 or whatever else they're going to be working on next. Who knows? So we try and balance it to be good for everybody involved, and ultimately the guys that make these fantastic games need to be rewarded, and we shouldn't limit how much they can earn and then reinvest in more product.
It's a sound philosophy, I think. Like, now, in terms of physical releases, do you release for all the platforms, or is it limited to like the Switch, PlayStation 4?
Holy schmoly! Oh, now then. Oh, there's so many answers to that. We currently only, as a rule, go on PlayStation 4 and Switch. PlayStation 4 numbers are dwindling somewhat, noticeably against the behemoth that is Switch. So when you compare the two platforms together, it's not really fair. Having said that, there are times where we will look at a title and think, you know what, this might not even be worth having a go at doing this on PlayStation 4. So Switch always, as long as we're okay to do so. PlayStation 4 most likely, and Xbox has always been a problem because of the way the business model has worked with Microsoft and Xbox themselves. Way back when there was a minimum quantity order of 10,000 units in the US alone, and if you wanted it in Europe, that'd be another 10,000 units. So you've got 20,000 units of a game in stock before you blink, and you've got to have some special sort of AAA title to be doing those numbers. Equally, the cost of goods that they were originally looking at to create, the disc in the box and everything, was close to double PlayStation 4. So it kind of eats into margins and was a bit of an issue. We are currently working with Microsoft to try and address that, and I am hopeful that we will be doing Xbox games in the very near future for selected titles.
That is a story we've heard from others. It is unfortunate because, it's like if you want the physical edition of, say, Vaporum, it's just not possible given the circumstances.
No, not really at the moment. I mean, ultimately these are kind of indie games. The quality's good, but they're not the, you know, it's not an Assassin's Creed or you know, a huge title that's going to shift huge numbers.
Right. Not unless something unexpected happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
that's
we've
true.
seen that happen before.
Yeah, I mean, hi Minecraft.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took a while.
It did, but I mean, you know, that was not a game that was, you know, designed in the AAA laboratories.
No, absolutely.
Um, but anyway, what about the PC? How do you handle things on the PC platform?
No, we do PC as well. So, where possible, we'll try and do a digital version of PC, and then we'll look at physical copies on PC. Generally, there's not an awful lot of call for it. Steam and other online retailers out there, or digital retailers, have kind of got the market sewn up. So
That's
for instance, Dead Cells. Yeah, we've got a signature edition physical version, but the actual sales of it are minimal. I think it's, you know, it's fans of the game that really want a box on their shelf, but that's it. It's so small. That's not to say that the digital sales are great, but I think it's just the way the PC has gone. Retailers don't tend to put PC games on shelves anymore.
Well, like nowadays, a lot of new PCs aren't even coming with an optical drive.
There you go.
And more to the point, like even if they do put out a PC disc version of a game these days, it's just like the executable for like.
Absolutely, it's the game, but you need to, and then it comes with a Steam key that you register, and it gives you access to it. So it just adds it to your Steam library. The other problem that you have with that is that box strippers will buy up a ton of your games, and they'll throw away the disc and the box and everything. All they want is the key out of it.
Yeah, put the
So
key on some sort of, let's say, not reputable sites.
Yeah, you know the ones.
Yeah.
That got dunked on just the other day. Like, but yeah, I'm like, as I understand it, like PC retail stuff is more of a thing in Europe, but I'm like, it's still not much of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a store, a chain of game stores here called Game, funnily enough. And I was over in the States last month, and I looked in GameStop. They're actually quite similar in the way they operate and look, and both over here in Europe and in the US, I saw very little PC software. Very little indeed.
My GameStop, the PC section is just basically bundled with the gift cards, and you just get get basically the key off the shelf thing, take it to the register, and put it onto Steam.
That's it. And the only other thing you see there occasionally are the Blizzard treasure boxes.
Those seem to be, those seem to be perennial. Like I can still find them in like Walmarts.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they're about the only box stuff that I saw in the UK when I last went into game.
Like Mysteries of the Universe. Like, anyway, so moving onward, is this game's pronounced Sparklight, right?
Oh, Sparklight! I love Sparklight. Yeah, Sparklight is a great title. It's due for release September, maybe October. We're not forcing the devs. That's another thing that we don't like to do. You know, the devs will be finished when they're finished. So September, maybe into October. We'll see how we go. This is a game that we took to GDC and to PAX just recently. And you sit somebody in front of it of a certain age, and you give them the controller, and they just know what to do. If you think Zelda: Link to the Past on SNES, you know exactly what Sparklight's all about. It looks very similar. It's got that sort of retro pixel art graphic going on. The emphasis is on the gameplay and making sure that everything is just so. It's being created by a team called Red Blue Games out of Durham in North Carolina. There's Ed and Lucas Rowe, twin brothers, and their childhood friend Kevin is there, and they're working on it with a number of external artists and so on and so forth, and it's just coming together beautifully. It's you play the role of a young sassy adventurer called Ada. You crash land on the planet, this world's surface, and then from there on in, it's up to you to go and find out what's going on. But essentially, the planet is tied together with this ore that's called sparklight. And if you use sparklight, sparklight's got inherent power to it. And if you tap the power just in small doses, it recharges itself. But if you want a huge hit of power, then the sparklight will be destroyed in the process. So you soon discover that there's a guy there mining sparklight for his own ends, which is not good for anybody because it will mean the end of the planet. And you have to work with the local sort of population and the NPC characters and all those kind of guys to beat the guy. He's called the Baron, and he's got a number of end-of-level bosses in there and so on and so forth. The real cool thing about it is the way that the game, as you play, there's a focal town which is on a hot air balloon. It's a huge thing, and eventually, as you play, you develop and grow this town. But every time you visit the town, because the guy's mining sparklight back on the ground, there's a seismic shift, and the actual layout of the maps changes. I guess it's kind of roguelike, but we're trying to shy away from that because you actually have a map where you can see where it's changed and where the different things are, but it just keeps you on your toes. So yeah, we're really pleased with Sparklight. As I say, it's coming September, October, and it's coming to everything. We've already had great support from Xbox with it. The guys at Nintendo love it. Sony like the look of it as well, and I think it's a game for us that we're gonna throw the kitchen sink at, trying to go retail, digital, special signature edition versions for all of these. It's going to be great.
I do like what I see so far, and we'll probably have you back on the program, when this game's close to release to talk about it in depth.
Sure. Well, maybe we'll get the boys on the from the developer to come on.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Anyway. In terms of the PC, is this being developed for Windows, or is it going to be Mac and Linux as well?
It's definitely PC. I happen to know that the boys they actually use a Mac to create some of it, so it'll be on Mac as well. Linux, I'm not sure about. And Linux numbers are small. I think maybe in time it may, but I can't commit to Linux at the moment. But it'll be coming PC as well.
Yeah, that is a story that we've heard from other publishers and developers. Some like supporting the Linux folk, some don't. Mainly because of business reasons. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And sticking with the PC, it's like I have to ask this question going forward. What storefront will not just like Sparklight, but your catalog be appearing on? Because it's
PC?
Basically, is this any of your games going to appear on the Epic Games Store?
No plans at the moment.
Duly noted. That's just the thing I have to ask these days.
Yeah, no. Steam is our number one PC platform, and I can't see that changing particularly at the moment.
Until Epic Games gives you $1 Brazilian to only release on them.
No, of course. If you were to give me $1 Brazilian, you could have it.
I mean, he's not joking. That's what's going on right now. They're paying developers and publishers money to publish on the Epic Games Store exclusively. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. Another one I want to talk about here, Frostpunk. Now, this came out last year for the PC, and it's forthcoming for the consoles.
Yeah. So we worked with the guys at 11-bit. They're from Poland, and Frostpunk they did digitally on Steam and so on and so forth, and then we put it in a box. We did two versions. One was like the first, I can't remember how many thousand, but the first few thousand people got what was called the Victorian edition, that came with a fantastic hardback book. And then we had, once that had sold out, it just reverted to being the standard version. Yeah, very successful as PC games go for us. That was one of the few rare ones where we actually did it physically. So that was interesting. I cannot deny or confirm whether we're doing a console version. That's where I'll have to leave that at the moment.
That's unfortunate. Like, I've heard a lot of good things about Frostpunk now.
Yeah, it's a terrific game. I wonder, it's one of those kind of slower paced strategy games, and sometimes I wonder how those fare on console. But I think more and more, especially with Switch, maybe, where people are using the Switch on their commute, they don't necessarily want something frantic on their, say, a commute into work, or if they're playing just over their lunch break, they want something a little bit more cerebral to get their sort of their head around and just be able to delve into and deep dive. So I think Frostpunk will be a good success on console, and we'll see where it goes.
I mean, the Switch being, a handheld, and strategy works really well with portables. Like, I don't know if you've ever played, like, I don't know, say Advance Wars on...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had that on was it on the Game Boy Advance?
Yeah, or the DS.
Yeah, that's it, the DS. I had that on there. Brilliant game. I loved it.
So it's definitely a genre that can work on Switch. Like, anyway, let's see. We got Origami. We've actually got like two Origamis here, or that is rather.
Okay.
We've got Origami and we've got Origami Shadow Edition.
Okay, so Origami originally, it's been created by a team called Linceworks in Barcelona over in Spain, and they're a fantastic bunch of guys. They came to us, and Origami on PS4 was the very first signature edition game that we ever released. We were very pleased with it. It's a Tenchu style. It's a stealth game where you play as an undead ninja against I can't pronounce the Japanese name for them, but they're the Army of Light, and there are the levels that you have to go through, hiding in the shadows. It's very much a stealth game, very rewarding, hard. It's not an easy game. It's quite hardcore, but we were particularly proud getting that one onto Signature Edition. And then time passed, and they did an Xbox version, and then they did some DLC, and then they did an expansion pack. And lo and behold, we spoke to them, and with their help, we decided that, yeah, we could actually put all of this together, original game, expansion, and DLC in one neat package on the Switch. So we worked with them closely to do the game both at retail, Signature Edition, and digitally. So that came out at the back end of January, I want to say. Yeah. That's been successful on the Switch. In fact, I can tell you that we ran out of Signature Edition, and I've got some more coming in. So there's a game there where we had to reorder.
Oh, neat! Like, yeah. Was it a hard process getting Origami onto the Switch, given the power differentials?
Yeah, so I don't deal in the production side of things, but I sit across the other side of the office and I hear them. And they had a tough time. We used a porting company called Stage Clear over in Spain. You know the Stage Clear guys?
We've had them on the program.
It's a small world after all.
It So they work very closely. Linksworks and Stage Clear work very closely together. When we first started looking at it, Linksworks were not convinced that we could get the frame rate to where we wanted it to be. But thanks to Juan and his team at Stage Clear, they worked tirelessly on it. They did I think they did a fantastic job, and it's good. It got to where they wanted to be. I don't know what magic dust he used to sprinkle over the code, but he worked some magic.
I've seen a lot of magic done with the Switch. I mean, it's
this will never run. Why is this running? Why is this running well?
Absolutely, it's very, very strange.
Indeed.
And as consoles go, it's weird to see, because I remember we had one of the first ones of ours in the office, and people were kind of like, yeah, it's okay, and nobody really bothered too much. But then when you realise, actually, I can take this wherever I go and play the same games that I'm playing on the TV or whatever, it soon became a firm favourite. And when we take it to the shows, it's the console of choice for most of our visitors to the stand.
Not surprising, as you can take it with you.
Right? Yeah. You can't help but feel that Sony missed a trick with the Vita and what they were doing with that, and had they really kind of invested a bit of time and effort and a bit more research, they might have come up with something a little bit more interesting.
Well, I mean, I couldn't speak to that. Like, Sony seems to be done with handhelds. So.
Yeah, it's weird, because we had, for instance, Darkest Dungeon, the collector's edition, which we recently put out. We spoke to the Red Hook guys, and yes, we'd already done a Switch version, and we'd already had a version of the PlayStation. So it was easy just to add all the DLC to make it this final last hurrah for that particular iteration of the product. And then it was like, well, hang on a minute, don't we have these on Vita? And they're like, yeah, we've got them on Vita. It's like, well, let's put them in a box. And there's this underlying sort of sub community of people that they're Vita crazy, man. They'll collect everything going on the Vita. I had one guy come to see me at PAX, and he had a long list of Vita games in the US, Japan, and Europe. And it was a long, long list. And he was missing maybe 30 from across all the world. He had the lot. I'm sure he must live alone. He can't be married. Anyway.
Well then.
Yeah. Anyway, Vita collectors, they're out there, and yeah, there are still some good titles to be got on Vita.
Unfortunately, the digital store is not. Where did they close that down? Is it everywhere, or just everywhere but Japan, or whatever? And
I think you're thinking that might be the PlayStation Portable.
Yeah, PSP stores closed down in the EU.
Okay, so yeah, the Vita's still functional.
The Vita's still
not
there,
super supported.
Believe it or not, the Vita's actually getting more games in Japan than the 3DS.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a reason for that, which we won't get into here.
Okay. Let's move on.
Yes. So this is a curious one. Buildings have feelings too.
Yeah.
That is the actual name of this game.
Yeah, that's I came up with that.
Oh, TOO2?
Meaning as well. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious, because it could have been an original Buildings Have Feelings, and this is a sequel.
No, this is an original title. This is being created in Belfast by a team called Black Staff Games. And the premise is it's a city builder game. It's kind of a parallax scrolling city builder game. It features 9 distinct districts to your city, starting in the 1920s. So you start in the 1920s with just like a high street, and the idea is it's the buildings you're saving. The people are kind of a currency here. So it's making sure the buildings are happy, are repurposed into businesses or accommodation or services that the people want. So, for instance, you can build every town needs somewhere for people to work. So you build a linen mill, and that's fine, building a linen mill. But if you put a residential house next to it, the linen mill's happy because it's got company, but the residential house isn't happy because it's all the noise and smell and all the rest of it from the linen mill. So you've got to learn quickly where you need to put houses. And they actually get up, they've got arms and legs, and they walk around. You play the role of this building called the halfway house, and it's your job to kind of organize the buildings and then repurpose them, build new ones, and get them all in sort of the area that they're happy with. You're upgrading them all the time, and as you upgrade them, there's a tech tree that opens up new. So if you've got retail, for instance, you start off with the butchers. Once you've got the butchers to level 3, then the bakers and maybe the I don't know, the bakers and the tailors will open up, and you can start putting those in. And the idea is to get your district to a state of utopia where all the buildings are happy, they're all at the highest level, and then that will unlock another district within the city. And the idea is that you will eventually have to be jumping between districts, because as well as being able to upgrade them, there are a number of specialists you have to have. So financiers, there are medical staff, there are services-based staff. I'm trying to think what the others are, but that gives you an idea. And you have to use those when you upgrade the buildings. Each particular district will also have what we call a hero building. So for instance, we've got a district which is kind of the entertainment district. And the building that's the hero building in that is actually based on the Belfast Opera House. All the buildings that you see in the game are real life interpretations of stuff that the coders see in and around their workplace. So the as well as having to have this kind of sim management type thing going on, the hero buildings will also give you tasks and quests to go on. So of course an opera house wants to be flanked by high-end fashion and jewelry stores, and you'll have to create those and put those in and make sure that those are all happy and everything's singing and dancing. Every time you open up a new level, the year increases by a decade. So you start in the 1920s, by the time you open the second level, you'll have buildings that are pertinent to the 1930s, and you'll be able to go back and upgrade your 1920s houses to 1930s houses, and it just snowballs. I think that's about it.
I have to say, the trailer for this game is somewhat hypnotizing, and also it's very interesting aesthetic that is managing to be cute, but also kind of a little bit unnerving.
I mean, philosophical underpinnings of this game are, quite frankly, stark and horrifying. Like, do the buildings eat? What do they eat? So many questions.
That's a good question. Do they eat? No, they don't eat.
Oh God, no! There's gonna be a whole lore book on this by the time we're done.
Yeah.
They eat feelings.
No, they. I guess the lifeblood of the buildings are the people, and of course, to attract the people, the building has to be happy and in the right place. So going back to the linen mill, if you've got a linen mill next to a residential house, they ain't going to be happy. But if you put a pub in between them, then the workers from the linen mill are happy because they can go to the pub at lunchtime, and the people from the residential are happy because they can go and use the pub as light entertainment, and everybody gets along. So that's kind of an example of putting the right buildings in the right place. But ultimately, the lifeblood of the buildings are the people. Whether it be the specialists needed to upgrade the buildings, but of course, if you've got a house as a residential area, you need people to move in and live there, and so you need to sort of supply their needs as well. So they eat people, or they breathe people, let's say.
So, if you put like two buildings that don't like each other next to each other, do they eventually start fighting? Like, do they start punching each other?
No, they don't. They don't. You might get an interaction through speech bubbles where they'll talk to one another, and there's a whole sort of layer of comedy in there. But what will happen is that they won't be developing quick enough, so that you won't be able to upgrade them. And in the worst case scenario, if you've got a building that really isn't happy where it is. People will move out, and when people move out, the building becomes derelict unless you do something with it. Eventually, it gets demolished, which is very sad.
That's an existential horror.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question. Will there be any like DLC for like other famous buildings from around the world?
It's something that we've discussed with the developers. It's certainly there on their radar. I would have loved to have opened it up and have DLC so we can pick a major US city, or maybe Paris, or
Yeah, I was about to mention on the given the events in Paris yesterday.
Yeah, that was very, very sad indeed. But they've already raised 400 million euros towards the restoration already. So less than
and it looks like, and thankfully it looks like the damage was not quite as severe as it initially looked.
Oh, I saw some of the pictures of inside. I think anything that was wood has gone. So but the walls and the stonework is in place. It will take them a long time to get that back.
Right, but it's better than if the stone was also.
Yeah. Actually, the interior's pretty intact.
Aside from part of the roof caving in, I think.
Yeah, and
I
did hear that they had 3D mapped the whole thing, so they've got records to be able to recreate using the 3D mapping techniques and data that they've got. So fingers crossed, it will reopen, but it'll be a while. What a shame. But yeah, the idea is to have it would be great to have DLC that was pertinent to a particular city. So we spoke and we were talking sort of US cities. You know, Seattle, you could have the Needle, or you could have the various different skyscrapers in New York, and so on and so forth. So we have discussed it. Whether or not it will come to fruition, we shall see.
Fair enough.
I don't. Yeah. I can't confirm anything on DLC for that.
Fair. Yeah. Indeed.
Got to get the game out first. The base game first.
Right. Let's see here. Another one from the past that we want to talk about is Moonlighter.
The wonderful Moonlighter. And we've kind of drawn a little bit of inspiration, I guess, from Sparklight with this one. Again, this is the same guys over in Poland that we worked with, 11-Bit Studios. They were the digital publisher. The team, Digital Sun, another team out of Spain. There's a lot of good teams in Spain. And so we worked with 11-Bit to again do the PS4 and Switch retail editions, and then the signature editions. You got a sort of a squishy stress toy, which is one of the monsters out of the dungeon in there, and the Moonlighter medallion. You got that in the signature edition version. So the game itself, the premise is that during the day you have inherited the family store, selling whatever you can to make a fast buck. And then at night, nearby, there are 5 dungeons that you, as an intrepid explorer, jump into and basically ransack and loot. Whatever you find in there and manage to get out, you then sell in your shop during the day. And it becomes a cycle whereby you're slowly making more coin, and then being able to take that coin, upgrade your weapons, the town itself, and you progress through the harder dungeons till you get to the 5th and final dungeon. The team at Digital Sun did a fantastic job recently and put out. They support the game anyway with patches and small updates, but they put a major update out. It must have been maybe 2 or 3 months ago that gave you even more content. Added a whole new list of features, and that was really fantastic. And they've been rewarded. I think it was just the other day, either this week or last week, that 11-Bit announced that in total they'd done 500,000 units of Moonlighter. So it's been a success, and we sell it in retail in the States. And we found that, and in Europe, and we found that it's done better in the US than it has done in Europe. Not by much, but normally they're neck and neck, but the Americans seem to have taken to Moonlighter in a big way. It's a good game.
That's good.
Yeah, it seemed conceptually similar to the game Reciteer, if you remember that one from a long time ago.
I was going to say there's a little bit of a genre of this with various. I mean, it's not. There are a couple others at least, but yeah, Reciteer is sort of a similar thing. Only this one seems to have significantly less fairy loan shark induced crippling debt, and also less cute anime girls.
Right. Okay. I've not heard of the title that you mentioned, but maybe I'll have to go and check it out.
Mike, let's see. Moving forward, Brawl Out.
Okay, yeah, Brawl Out was a game that we didn't do in the end for a signature edition. I'm not sure why. We put it in retail for Switch and PS4, both sides of the Atlantic. It's a game that the team that's Angry Mob Games are the publisher behind this game, and when it first came out, there was no Super Smash Brothers on Switch, so this was kind of a for those people who like Super Smash, this was a halfway house. It kind of got a following of its own, but I particularly liked the way that these guys. They took the game and then they kept adding to it. So it had its original lineup of characters, of which there were many, but then they got in touch with various other indie publishers and developers. They added Hyperlight Drifter was in it. Then they added, oh God, what was the other guy? Guacamole, he's the guy from that's in it. Then they added Ukulele has been in it. Just recently, they've added the headless guy from Dead Cells. So slowly but surely, they just keep adding content, and this content's all for free. You just plug it in. It says there's an update. It'll download it, and you get all the new extra bits and pieces. So it's a steady multiplayer fighting game that just sits there and keeps reinventing itself and growing in stature. Good title.
It sounds like the Smash Brothers of the indie world.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those. There are 2 or 3 indie sort of games, but this, I think, with the bold graphics, to say maybe it's the Smash Bros of the indie world. That's a good analogy. I can't reveal at the moment, but there will be. We've got another title that's similar that will definitely be the Smash Brothers of the indie world. If you think Brawl Out's got some indie characters, we've got a new game coming back end of the year that has got loads, absolutely loads. And I sat there and went through the list of characters in the game, and there's at least there are over 30 indie heroes in this title that we're going to be bringing out. But enough of that. You'll have to wait for another episode to find out more about that one.
A tease for down the line.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway.
There's so much that I could tell you, but I'm not allowed to.
Right. Don't want you to break your NDAs.
No, absolutely.
Last time we had that, there had to be some heavy editing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, as far as I know, I've not said anything that I can't say.
Yeah. Anyway, so we are getting low on time, so we'll wrap up the interview with Riot Civil Unrest.
Oh, what a game. Or is it? It's more of an experience, Riot Civil Unrest. So blimey, I think Riot actually precludes me being at Merge, but only just. It took a long time in development. Came out on the PC in December 2017, and then January 2018 this year, finally got it on the consoles. It's a what-if sort of Riot simulator. So it has 4 campaign modes: Egypt, Greece, Italy, and another one which escapes me at the moment. And then it has individual levels, so London, Paris, Oakland, They're all in there, and they're based on real riots. What happens at the beginning of each particular play session is you will pick whether to be the police or to be the protesters. You can load up your team, as it were, or your side, depending on what you've unlocked in the game, and then it'll give you a goal for the scenario. So, for instance, if you were the protesters, it might be, okay, here's a square in Parliament Square in London. We want you to sit and occupy this space for 3 minutes. And you have to do that while the police and the law enforcement will try to move you on through whichever way they see fit. And equally, as a rioter, you can try and achieve that goal in whichever way you see fit. The idea is to try and get you playing both the police and the rioters, and to understand sort of how both work, and actually sort of ultimately a lot of the time there's a futility to it all. The guy that created the game, Leonard Manchiari, he was involved in what were called the Notav riots in northern Italy. They were trying to build a high-speed rail link between somewhere in France and I think Turin, and it was going through some of the most beautiful countryside in Tuscany and around that area. And he was there really to report on it, and he spoke to the rioters, who are obviously up in arms that this environment is going to be trounced by a train network. And then he spoke to some of the police officers involved there and the riot police, and they were saying, well, actually, they kind of agreed with the rioters, but they're doing their job, trying to keep the peace and trying to allow the work to happen. And it's kind of a juxtaposition between sort of what's right and wrong. What we don't do ever in the game is try to tell you about the riot itself and the reasons behind it. If you want to go and find that out, you can. So at the moment, there are various riots going on in Caracas in Venezuela. Those are in the game from when it first started out. There are some Easter eggs in there. So, for instance, in that particular, the one in Venezuela, there was a woman who had hot pants on, a motorbike helmet. She'd obviously worked out at the gym. If you Google her, I think they call her Wonder Woman, Venezuela riot. You could probably find her. She's actually appears as a sprite in the game. There's another one, I think it's in Santiago in Chile, where there's a guy dressed up as Santa Claus. And again, he was in the real riots. He's in the game. So it becomes an experience of playing as the police or the rioters and trying to achieve these goals. Ultimately, especially if you're playing the campaign mode, you learn very quickly that even though you might finish a level, let's say you're the police and the idea is you've got to move these people away from a particular area and clear the area, you can go in with rubber bullets and tear gas and all sorts and absolutely clear them out. Water cannon, everything. It's great, no problem. But then it reports back, days of rioting, the police were heavy-handed, police used excessive force, and the next time you play it on the second level, the rioters will be ready for you, and they'll be even harder to move. And ultimately, it kind of teaches you that, yeah, protest is good, but actually it's peaceful protest is good, and unless only use violence in very, very small amounts. Otherwise, you're never going to achieve anything. It was certainly a labour of love for the team. They created it in Italy, and it came on PC, as I said, first, and then all three console formats we had at the beginning of the year, and we did a signature edition version of that as well. I guess the most striking thing is some of the pixel artwork is phenomenal, and Leonard, who was responsible for the pixel artwork, did a phenomenal job. The team have since then actually created on Steam. If you play it on PC, it's got a level editor, so you can actually put in your own graphics and create your own riots. And the number of people that have been doing that, and some of the riots that they've been creating has been quite impressive. Some people have got some real talent.
Indeed. I suppose a question in regards to this game is, given that this is dealing with real subject matter, a controversial subject matter nonetheless, have you ever gotten, angry people yelling at you over the internet about it?
No, no, because we actually don't pass comment. The only time we get angry people, and I guess they're not angry at us, is that they want to know is why isn't their riot featured? And with console, DLC and content is a little bit harder to and certainly a level editor is a nightmare because of the restrictions we have with the first parties. But now we've given them the tools and they go away and they create and share their own riots and whatever they want to have there. So no, we've never had anybody that's become agitated, maybe is the word, by the game itself. No, it's just people wanting to recreate their own riots and sort of have it shown and be noticed.
Now, I have a question. Does this, depict, actual graphic violence, or is it more just kind of non-lethal?
No, you can, as you progress, the rioters stock up with the Molotov cocktails, and I've seen police on fire, and I've also seen the police use live rounds on it. So yes, there can be deaths in it, but it's very pixelated, and you don't see a real graphic depiction,
Especially compared to some of the footage of some riots,
Yeah, it's very, very pixelated.
Because I remember in high school they were trying to talk about some of the riots, but they couldn't show any of the pictures because they were just too gruesome to show to 15, 16-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this might be an easier way to get the point of those riots across.
Certainly, without the graphic, the excessive graphic depiction. So we had one of the riots that more recently that people want to portray are the Yellow Jackets in Paris, and I've seen pictures of that where people have been hurt and they've got head injuries and there's blood everywhere, and yeah, you don't get to see that level of detail.
Yeah.
Because it's so pixelated. And another cool feature about it is the way that the crowd moves. So it's got sort of these fluid sort of crowd movements. So each person in the crowd is an individual and they all move separately. So you kind of get waves of people surging forward and backwards and side to side. It's I guess it's more of a riot simulator than a game. That's how I would say you would describe it.
Well then, our time has unfortunately run out. As I said, there are a number of games here, some that we couldn't get to, but we'll certainly have you back on the program at a later date. When probably when some of these upcoming games are ready for release.
Yeah, and I'll be able to talk about some of the others that I alluded to.
Right.
My pleasure to come back and talk to you about them, and maybe I'll bring along some friends from a studio, and we can go in sort of a deeper dive into something like Sparklight.
Yeah, we'd like that. Anyway, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule and being with us today. It was lovely having you. And I look forward to having you back on the program in the future. Anyway, so that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for our first alpha episode, where we do the full gamut. And we'll be joined by our good friend John from Manga Gamer. Until then, I wish you good gaming.